your father being in the vegetable business, I think it's, you've said that he was a man who hated vegetables.
He hated all except corn and potatoes.
That just strikes me
And
as...
he used to say in Yiddish to my mother that he didn't want any green, nothing green for me. So, of course, my brother and I knew that phrase, and we knew what it meant. Of course, after he said it, he was the only one who didn't get spinach and string beans. So it must have had something to do with it. But also, his being in the business helped make me critical too, because he was very critical. He would talk about the fruit and produce that came into his company from all over the country by truck every day. And he had very strong feelings about apples, for example. Apples from the East Coast being much better than apples from the West Coast because there weren't enough cold nights on the West Coast. He liked oranges from California, but grapefruit from Florida. And I must say, I still think Indian River grapefruit from Florida are the best I've tasted. And I order white ones once a year from a firm called Hale Grove, and I get about 8 white grapefruit, because it's very hard to find white grapefruit, and I like them better than the red ones. They're not as sweet. They're very tart. So, you begin to think, well, all things are not alike, and I better taste carefully and see which one I like best, and thus is born a critic.
And it sounded like they though there was polite disagreement, they respected your opinion.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Although I love the thing that you said that your mother said. You said, I know I'm going to have a big job one day. Yeah. I just don't know what it is. And she said, it's going to be washing an elephant.
She said, maybe you'll wash an elephant.
Yeah. So, with a mother like that, I think you can understand eloping at 19. But
I will say, though, my first writing career was not food. It was home furnishings and interior design. And there again, my mother, would call me Mrs. Decorator. And when I had my first apartment painted, everything was white. And she said, for the same money, you could have had a color. So I said, Mom, white is a color.
So let's talk about Midwood a little bit, because you were there at a remarkable time. You went in 1943, and that was the beginning. Like you said, it's the beginning.
I started Midwood in I graduated in 43.
Oh, graduated, sorry.
But I started in 41, and Midwood opened in September of 1941. Yeah, and just had last year its 75th birthday with a big party that I went to. But it opened in September, and then in December was Pearl Harbor, and it was the first school in New York City to have a public address system. And we were all in class on that Monday the 8th when Franklin Roosevelt declared war on the Empire of Japan. And I can still remember I was sitting in Flora Shaw's Latin class, shivering at what was about to come. It was to hear someone declare war, and you wondered, are bombs going to fall on us? Who knows what's going to happen?
That seems a very reasonable fear to have.
Yeah. And then when the war was on, all the girls had to take home nursing courses. I still know how to bathe a patient in bed. I know how to change the bedding with a patient in bed. And all the boys were trained to be aircraft, what do you call them? Warrant. Wardens, aircraft wardens. So the boys did that, the girls were making beds, and there were no proms. But Midwood was extraordinary because it was a new and very well-equipped school. They sort of creamed the crop of teachers around the city. And we had spectacular teachers. I don't think I've ever been in a situation with such quality teaching. And I think what I emerged with was the love of learning, of finding a new subject and going into it, and how exciting that could be. And I hope I never stop feeling that way. It was an extraordinary school. And I went back a few years ago as principal for a day when Pencil had that program, and then started a program with English as second language students using food as a vehicle to get them to speak and write English. We critiqued the food in the cafeteria, which the Board of Education was not very happy about.
I don't think they expected you to turn your criticism on that.
Clyde Haberman did a column in the New York Times on it, and the principal wasn't supposed to let anyone in the school without telling the board, and there we all were. So it was very nice.
But there also have been, in addition to you, some extraordinary graduates of Midwood, right? Like Woody Allen came.
He hated it.
He hated it.
And at one of the reunions, he made a film. They went and interviewed him, and he said, it was the most miserable time of my life. And I hated it. And every morning I got up and had to decide whether to take the bus to Midwood or get in the subway and go to the city. And the happiest days was when I went into the city. But of course, he was already writing for the Sid Caesar show. So
when he was in high school.
Yeah, and so I think that might make you very impatient with high school. He said he never liked any other school either after that. His sister liked it. She was very active, Letty, in the Alumni Association. But that was way after me. He was 10 years younger than I am. He graduated in 53, and I was 43. So.
And then after that, Marvin Hamlish, Matilda Cuomo.
Eric Siegel.
Yeah.
Howard J. Rubinstein, the great publicist. But mostly successful businessmen more than artists. It was very interesting.
Right, I think it was supposed to be
Compared
a
to
brainiac
Madison.
school.
I mean, James Madison, where I went for a year and thought this is where I was going to go. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, all went to James Madison, so I figured there must have been something going on at James Madison. It's three different generations almost.
So when you graduated from Midwood and you went to NYU,
right?
And did you feel you're indeed leaving this bland borough behind forever?
Well, the first 2 years I didn't leave it behind because I lived at home.
Oh.
At the end of every day, I went home to Brooklyn. I mean, if you lived that close, you didn't live in a dorm in those days. And then at 19, at the end of my sophomore year, I eloped and wanted to support myself, except I let my parents continue paying for college. But I switched to night school and got an apartment in Greenwich Village so I would be near NYU, and I never left Greenwich Village.
I mean, so, and then the house that you're in now, how long have you lived in?
52 years. Yeah. We own it.
Right.
Happily, I own it, although what's happening to real estate prices all around me is totally staggering. A house a few doors away from mine just sold for $19 million.
Wow. Everyone's always fascinated by real estate. So, as you said, the first writing that you did was actually in home furnishings.
That's right.
And so I'm curious, what was the segue from home furnishings to food?
Well, food was always my love and sort of a hobby. And when my first job was at Good Housekeeping, writing home furnishings copy. But then I went to 17 as the home furnishings editor, but I shared the office with the food editor, and a test kitchen was attached. So we became good friends, and I used to go in it and splash around and make things and so on. And when she left for something else, the editor said, why don't you do that too? It's not such a big deal on 17, and you like it. So I did home furnishings and food at 17.
So you did, but was that cooking, like recipe developing?
Oh, yes. In fact, a wonderful cookbook has just been issued called Leave Me Alone with the Recipes by C.P. Pinellas, who was a very famous art director of 17, and she was an illustrator. And she did a model of a cookbook that she wanted long ago. All of the recipes are in handwriting, and the illustrations are fabulous. And I think it was Maria Popover of Brain Pickings who found the book at an antiquarian book fair and decided to see if she could get it published. And somehow I knew she was doing that, and she knew that the recipes in C.P.'s book were very similar to those in From My Mother's Kitchen, which was my mother's cooking. So we got together, and she said, would you contribute to the book? So I have a chapter.
That's incredible. So
it's a beautiful, for a gift, it is just glory. I think it's Amazon number 1 in the design category, which
so
is interesting.
as in this small world, like all food people think alike, I was in Seattle and I was at Books Larder, which is the greatest cookbook store in Seattle and one of the best in the country, and I bought that book.
Really?
Yes.
It just came out.
It just came out.
Beautiful.
Because I love Maria Popova from Brain Pickings. I love the idea of the magazine background, because clearly I have one.
Right.
And it's beautiful.
Just stunning.
Yeah.
And funny. I mean, she had a sort of a funny time with some of the spelling. She put an E, because she was an immigrant from Austria and Poland, got out of the way of the Germans. And so potato had an E at the end of it, and tomato. And parsley is spelled about 6 different ways.
Oh my
But
goodness. It's still in my suitcase, actually.
What was interesting is that there were so many dishes in it with names I had never heard outside of my own family. And there she was with the same names. Wow. And the point of what I wrote there is I was so in awe of this woman because she was so elegant and so arty. If I had known she was eating the same kind of gefilte fish and the same kind of chopped liver, I would not have been in awe with her. So
you were developing recipes, which was at this point you need a lot of training to do that. And then you wrote up the recipes and they were published.
Yeah.
And from there, because I know that you consulted for Restaurant Associates.
Well, after 17, I went to House Beautiful as managing editor of their supplement division. 4 bridal books, 2 gardening, and 2 architecture books a year. And then I began to freelance. Excuse me, I've been a long 20 years of freelancing until finally I became the restaurant critic for Q magazine, where they thought my name was improbable, so I wrote as Martha Martin for 2 years. Yeah.
Mimi Sheraton was improbable?
Improbable. So Martha Martin probably sounded like,
I think it's funny that you gave up Miriam Solomon. Like you could have actually had some other
I have
aliases.
a lot of names I haven't used yet, including Falcone, which is my married name. A lot of names.
That's funny. So I want to hear all about consulting on that very original Four Seasons, which is, as I'm sure you know, is just reopened as the grill and the pool. And Mimi consulted on that project now, but she consulted on it when it first opened, and has been such an iconic restaurant. What was that like?
Well, it was for me a fabulous education, because my role was to research seasonal dishes, foods that were seasonal expressions all over the world, to look for certain special serving ware if they wanted to have a special dinner, and to come up with recipes. Not that I created so much as that I found that we could test and consider. And for about 3-4 weeks before it opened, we met every day for lunch. The company then, Restaurant Associates, excuse me, had the Hawaiian room in the Lexington Hotel, and we would meet at the banquet room every day at 1 o'clock and taste 35 dishes.
Oh my goodness.
Going through from cold appetizers, half a soup, and the maitre d' would be there practicing the service, how you were going to ladle this out, and then Joe Baum, who was the great creative vice president, sort of the Cecil B. DeMille of the restaurant world, would say, well, you made it with time. Let's do it over tomorrow with sage. And so the whole thing would be done. And for me, it was such a learning stage, because I could taste so many things that were very exotic that, it was great to learn about, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity so fast. And I also worked on menu writing, and the language for the menu. And it was, and then when it opened, we had to go, what they now call friends and family, we had to go every day or lunch and dinner and order from the menu. And there was goat on the menu, and one night I ordered goat, and Joe Baum walked by and he said, "What did you order?" And I said, "Goat." He said, "Are you crazy eating goat?" I said, "Then why is it on the menu?" He said, "Because people feel better about eating steak if they know they could have had goat." I think he was right. I think, it was all exotic, that I happened to want steak. So.
All right, I'm in a very special place. So you are known as an extraordinary researcher. So how did you find those recipes that you found for them?
I established a library for them. There was a wonderful out-of-date rare cookbook store in New York in the Village called the Corner Bookshop. And the owner of that, Eleanor Goldwater, would do a lot of the research, and she would find books. I think they do that now at Kitchen Arts and Letters, but this was all old books. And we bought the books and made a library, because they went on to create a lot of other restaurants that I worked on for them. The Tower Suite and the Italian one, Trattoria in what was called the Pan Am building, now the MetLife building. And Joe Baum always wanted a story behind the theme of his restaurant. So we would get the books and do the research and so on.
And Zum Zum, right?
Zum Zum, which was my name.
Was that?
Was my name because I had
How'd you
been
come up with that?
research for the German cookbook, and I had traveled a lot in Germany. And there are a number of restaurants in Germany and Austria that begin with the word zum, which in that context means to thee or of thee. They were usually restaurants of a society that had a public restaurant. Like, let's say, if the American Legion had a restaurant, and it would say Zum Speckmeier. That was a famous one in Austria. So they wanted a name for the chain that meant speed and sounded German, but didn't really mean anything. And so we all had to go home and write. And so at one point I wrote Zum, and then I wrote Zum after it, and I handed it in with a whole list. And the next day I came in, and Joe said, "The name of the chain is Zum Zum." So I said, "That's my name." And he didn't answer me. I said, "That's my name." He said, "I can't admit it."
So what do you think of the new, it's not called the Four Seasons, the grill and the pool, and you consulted on, so what did you help them with this go round?
Mostly dishes and the tone of the menu, and what they finally decided to do rather than riff on the Four Seasons was, especially for the grill, to sort of reference what were classic New York dishes of, let's say, places like 21 and that kind of thing in the 50s and the 60s, but do them all in very new ways. And it's a wonderful chef on the grill, Mario Carbone, and I think the food is marvelous. And at night, quite a lot of fun, because they do tableside carving of prime rib and a lot of flambeing. The pool is quite different in that it's all seafood, and all very inventive. It's not so much referencing the past. The food is wonderful. The room is a little bit of a problem, which I think they're working on, because it's rather big and open and a little sparse. And of course, when you're in a space like that, it invites comparison to the Four Seasons, which is not what it is. The Four Seasons is going to open very soon across Park Avenue and a couple of blocks south of the Seagram's building, 280 Park Avenue.
Did you continue to go to the Four Seasons over time?
Oh, yes. I even reviewed it.
Oh, tell me. I'm very curious. What year did you review it, ish?
I'm not sure of that, but I know I gave it 2 stars or 1 star. It wasn't very good by that time. And, of course, what I did, if I thought they would know me, and I knew they would know me in there, wigs and glasses or not, is always made the reservation in another name and had my friends, the couple, arrive first. And I said, order something. Order an appetizer while you're waiting for us. And they were in the big room, in the pool room. And as I walked over, the captain was about to slice a really tired out, dried out tail of smoked salmon. And when he saw me coming, he just pulled the guerdon away, went back in the kitchen, came out with a beautiful new side of salmon. So,
did that make it into the piece?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I live for. For that reason, Regine's was fun, because they were so terrible to me.
Does anyone remember Regine's? A nightclub, very Euro. From Paris. That's the Euro part, I guess. Yeah. On Park Avenue and 62nd or so?
Yeah, just around there, and they were terrible.
So what did you do?
Well, I 3 times was the minimum the Times still accepts before a review, and I went there more than that, but nobody knew me. And I went in one Saturday night, my husband and a journalist on the paper, Larry Van Gelder, and a date, and we come in with a reservation and say who we are, and the maitre d' says, I don't know where we're going to put you. We're inundated with royalty tonight. And then he turned to a captain and said, the king will be here at midnight with 6 bodyguards. So I thought, that's not a very popular king. There's 6 bodyguards. And all the meals went that way. And it was such a delight to write the review.
Another famous review of yours, I think, is, you found Rayo's, which...
I found, a friend took me,
so tell us,
Rayo's
is impossible to get into Italian with a great story. So.
Yeah, it was a successful restaurant up in Spanish Harlem, Pleasant Avenue and 114th Street. Not very big, very, very high quality red sauce Italian. Very popular with journalists and writers and the mob. And
shouldn't that come first?
And a local politician took us up there. He was very good. He didn't say who we were. And I was blown away. I just thought the whole presentation, all the food, the oddity of the place itself. And I went a few times. You could get in then.
We
used the name Falcone. They didn't know that I was a writer. And I gave it 3 stars. And they went crazy at Rayo's. Frank Pellegrino, who died recently, who was the head of it, came to my 90th birthday party, and he told the story. And he said, we did not know what a restaurant review was. We didn't read the Times. We read the Daily News. And when she called to say she was reviewing us, I said, well, you can write a few inches. And I said, I'll write as much as I want. And they went crazy because they didn't want these people to come up. They didn't want this business. They had all the business they wanted, so they said, let's close for the month of August. This came out at the end of July, and they said, let's close for August, and it'll blow over. And it has not blown over yet. And he said, since that review, there has not been one night when they have had one empty table at Rayo's. So, and they kept it up, they kept it good, because this is always a problem. When you give something a great review, they get to think they don't have to try anymore. But
I don't know. I think sometimes it's the reverse, though, right? That you get a great review, and just living up to that review is something that burns in you every single day. But a lot of the tables are taken by people who have the seats, every Monday. That's their table.
Timeshares.
Except I don't think you can sell them.
The Bo Dietl, who fortunately lost his bid for mayor the other day, has a table at Rayo's. And he told me, I spoke at Frank Pellegrino's funeral, as did he. And he said, I made him famous because he was a regular at Rayo's, and a few days before my review came out, Frank said to him, Bo, this is going to be your table. You can have this every Thursday night, I think. It was the biggest table in the place. When the review came out and the restaurant became hot, his table was a great prize, and a lot of famous people who got connected to him said, can we use your table for a night? And he said, you can't have it, but you can be my guest. So Warren Buffett and Marty Scorsese and all kinds of people got to be great friends of Bo Dietl, on the basis of which he began a security firm, which is what he has. But fortunately, he will not be the mayor.
You were the original critic in the disguises. We know there's other critics who came after you,
right,
who perhaps might make that claim, but it's not true. And you would leave your house looking like you and change in the...
Even leaving the Times, and I would have the wig in a bag and got in a cab, and I had 3 wigs. I had a Greenwich Village Lady Poets wig, bangs and a cage boy. I had a Five Towns wig. And then I had a sort of floozy wig, and I also had glasses with plain glass. I had a friend who was in the eye frame business, and he gave me a lot of eyeglass frames with glass in them, and I've never worn glasses, so that sort of deflected recognition.
Do you still not wear glasses?
Once I used some for the computer for strain, wow. And if I'm reading the paper for a long, long time, I put them on. I don't really need them, but that's
amazing, right?
That's just lucky.
Amazing.
Luck.
So, do you feel, because there's in the restaurant reviewing world, there's it has been over time a lot of questions. The power of anonymity, or now when everyone, there are very few people who are anonymous anymore. What do you think of anonymous versus not anonymous critics?
I think anonymity is way, way preferable, but I don't know how you can maintain it now with all the Instagrams and posting on email on the web. There were pictures of me in some of the kitchens, and I remember there was a Hungarian restaurant opened by George Lang in the Citicorp building, and they didn't recognize us. He was not there that night, or he would have recognized me no matter what I was wearing. And we had a table near the kitchen, and every time the door slammed open, my husband saw my picture on the wall.
Oh my God!
But nobody, the staff just wasn't geared to recognizing. But I think anonymity has to be preferable, because you want to know how what I want to know is, how will ordinary people be treated in this place? I always went out on Saturday night. Mm-hmm. Because that's the night Bridge and Tunnel comes in. Sometimes number one chef isn't even there. And those are the people that I was concerned about, because the high rollers who are regulars at these places, they're going to get good attention anyway. So that was never, the thing that guided me.
And do you feel that like a chef can switch out a ratty piece of beef for a fabulous piece of beef, but do you feel that the chefs can up their game when they know, currently like Pete Wells is walking in, or...
Well, that's what everyone says. I mean, what are they going to do once you're there? I wrote an article for Vanity Fair on what they can do once you're there, how they can change things, how I once went to a restaurant, the Palace, which was supposed to be the most expensive restaurant in the world, and the Sovereign. And I was with my husband, wife, and Frank Pryl, because I took him along to write about wine if it was an important place. And we ordered duck, and we waited, and meantime Frank is ordering one expensive bottle after another. And years later, we were told by someone in the kitchen they did 4 ducks before they got them right to send out to us. So
and you're so drunk by that time, the first duck would have been fine.
By that time, it was like a $500 check, which in those days was astronomical.
Yeah.
But... and there's a lot they can do depending on how much of the food is cooked to order. Chinese restaurants can do more than any others. They could begin by washing the wok. That would be a step in the right direction. And then they can make everything beautiful and fresh. And after the article came out, I had a call from Adi Giovanetti, who at that time owned a very good Italian restaurant called Il Nido. And he said, Signora, you don't know the half of it. We can do a lot more than that, especially if you order an appetizer. That gives us lots of time to play around with the main course.
Wow. And I know that, well, what was your very favorite restaurant during your time of reviewing?
Well, certainly Rayo's, and certainly my favorite restaurant in the world, though I haven't been in a long time, is Chez l'Ami Louis in Paris, which I did a very big piece on during a newspaper strike. New York Times was on strike. I did a story for Esquire magazine on eating in l'Ami Louis every night for a week.
Oh, wow.
And I do love that. And of course, I loved Lutèce, which is no more. That was always, if someone said, what is your favorite restaurant in New York, that was an easy answer. It's not so easy for me now, because there are different restaurants I like for different things.
Okay, but like
I
that...
loved the Coach House, which was a great restaurant in Greenwich Village, impeccably run and beautiful and perfect.
And now that's where Babo is. So
Right.
I know that you said that you sometimes see streets and restaurants like in 3 dimensions. You don't say dimensions, but they're ghosts of the restaurants past.
Well, the whole Greenwich Village and lots of New York, I see like a double exposed negative.
Yeah.
What was there before, and what's there now. When you hang around a place long enough, that's happened. And there's one place that I pass often because I go up 6th Avenue in a cab. The address is 666 6th Avenue, and the top of the building still says Charles Ruger, and there's a sign over the entrance to the store level saying Bazaar Français.
Yeah.
And that was a place that everybody who was going to be a serious cook had to buy cookware. It was all imported from France by this Alsatian Charles Ruger, and it was a very plain place. Everything was displayed as though it were a warehouse, but that's where you got the salad bowl that you never washed, and that's where you got the salad basket where you could swing it to dry your... I had to do it over a bathtub because I didn't have a big kitchen, but I wanted to do French cooking.
Your basket required. And so when you were the critic at the Times, Brooklyn was not a food mecca, though, of course, there are some...
A few famous, Gargiulo's, which was spectacular at the time, which I gave 3 stars to. The Aulettas took me there because they had grown up close to it in Coney Island, and it was spectacular. There was always Lundy's, on and off, and then Gage and Tolner's. And Bramonti was always, considered a good Italian, but you didn't
Peter
go
Luger.
to Brooklyn as often as you go now. I mean, here I am, and I'm coming back next week, and...
So we have to ask, what do you think of the Brooklyn restaurant scene from its new inception to the present?
I haven't been to so many, but the idea of it, of course, is interesting because it used to be relatively inexpensive to open up here. I think that's becoming less so. And therefore, it encouraged innovation, people who could afford to take a chance and develop new kinds of cuisine. So eventually, I feel many want to go to New York. Excuse me. I think... To me, and in my life, Brooklyn was a training ground to go to the city, which is what we called it. And Irwin Shaw, the novelist, who I think nobody reads anymore, alas, was asked about Brooklyn College, which he went to during the Depression. And he said it was a great place. It was free, and it taught me everything I had to know to get out of Brooklyn. And I think it's like parents. You raise children so they can fly the coop. And Brooklyn was the place where you were raised to fly the coop. And you begin to hear Brooklyn Fare is now coming to Manhattan, the restaurant that began in Brooklyn. And many of them who I want to sort of now try their wings in Manhattan, in the city.
Right, Chef's Fair.
Chef's Fair,
yeah.
And others.
So you have written this incredible book called 1,000 Foods to Eat Before You Die.
Yeah.
And I imagine you ate, extensively in order to put the book together. How many of those things you need to eat are from Brooklyn, would you guess? Was that an unfair question?
I mean, people in Brooklyn eat what a lot of other people eat too. But I would say the Manhattan clam chowder. I would say the shore dinner, as it used to be served at Lundy's with huckleberry pie, and is mentioned in this great new novel, Manhattan Beach. And
have you guys read Manhattan Beach, the Jennifer Egan book? So I bought it because Mimi suggested it, because there's great food in there and great Brooklyn. So it's a good intersection of people who would be interested in this talk tonight.
I would say a lot of what was New York Jewish and Italian food was also in Brooklyn at that time, except nobody but Italians knew pizza until after World War II. There were no pizza restaurants in my part of Brooklyn, maybe probably Bensonhurst or Bay Ridge, a lot of new foods came in then. But I would say the Lundy seafood and the neighborhood delis and the Chinese restaurants, which were everywhere.
My grandparents actually ran a deli in Brooklyn, where you paid by the plate.
Which what?
I don't know. Lost to history. Yeah. But that just reminded me because you were talking about
a deli
the
with
deli.
pastrami and hot dog. Really? Yeah. Where? What part?
Yeah.
Williamsburg?
No, but your parents were in Williamsburg.
Both sets of grandparents emigrated to Williamsburg, which is, of course, how my parents met. And my paternal grandfather was a very prominent rabbi, and so everybody knew him and knew the family. But they used to kid, when they all moved out of Williamsburg, they would make fun of Montrose Avenue, and you lived at Marcy Avenue, and now you go out and those are where everything is happening. So I thought that would amuse them. But
I thought it was funny because you said they were in the same way that you were so excited to get out of your neighborhood. They were really excited to get out of Williamsburg.
They were really excited.
They wanted to leave that all behind.
Yeah, they did. My parents left the whole kosher thing behind, the whole neighborhood behind. We celebrated the holidays. My parents could speak Yiddish because that's what they spoke to their parents. But other than that, it was American all the way.
So I'd be remiss to not ask what your favorite restaurants are in this, as you call it, this city right now. One of the extraordinary things about Mimi is that she's completely up to date. Like, we planned a lunch together, and I being, trying to be deferential, said, well, where would you like to go? Not knowing what the response would be. And Mimi literally listed the last 4 important openings in the last 2 weeks. I mean, I don't mean in 6 months. I mean in the last 2 weeks. She is 100% up to date and still goes out 3-4 nights a week. So getting your list of where you like to go now is, I'm sure, going to be a very current and great list.
Well, I love Le Coucou, which I think is an extraordinary addition to the city. I like Coke.
Do you want to tell people what it is?
Excuse me?
You want to just talk a little about what Le Coucou is?
Well, it's the chef is Dan Rose, a young American who made a name for himself in Paris with a restaurant called Spring, and came to the attention of a big backer here and opened up on Lafayette Street, Le Coucou. And it's a stunning place. And the
And the
food
backer,
is
Steven Starr, who's a huge restaurateur. So it's a fascinating combination of this indie American Frenchy guy.
Yeah, and it's
and
very,
Steven Starr.
it's French food, but it's modern presentation. I would say modern French. I love Coke Rico, although I hate the noise. It's terribly noisy, but that's
Go at
all
lunch, though.
rotisserie birds by Antoine Wesserman, who had a very famous restaurant in Strasbourg. Strasbourg, yeah, I get it mixed up with Salzburg. Strasbourg. So I like that. I love Loring Place, which the chef is Dan Kluger, who used to be at ABC. I like the grill very much, of my firm I work for. Let's see, I like, there's a new Chinese one I like, How Noodle and Tea from the Kitchen of Mrs. Zhu. Not a catchy name, but that's the name.
And near you in the
And my
village.
favorite Italian restaurant is Sandro, which is
Really?
on 81st Street between 1st and 2nd. Sandro Fioriti is a Roman, and the Roman cooking up there is really, really extraordinary.
So how long has that restaurant been open? I think that's, ish, like
maybe
decades.
6,
no?
7 years.
Oh.
He was at a lot of other restaurants. He
Okay.
worked for Tony May, and
Right.
he worked for Serafina, and then this one must be that, because I wrote about it about 5 years ago, and it was already about 2 years old. Not very big, not very fancy, but really quite wonderful.
I'm very curious about Danny Meyer's new Roman
I haven't been.
efforts. And I haven't either.
I've been to the new Union Square Cafe. I like that very much. I like the old setting for sentimental reasons, but this is, I think, very, very nice and very good. And there's a new one I like very much called Majorelle by Charles Masson, who used to be in the family of La Grenouille. And this is very elegant, very jewel-like, very sparkly, wonderful flowers. It's in the Lowell Hotel. And again, it's stylized French cooking, but exquisite. Have you been?
I have. This setting is so beautiful. They renovated the restaurant space. They also renovated some of the rooms.
The whole hotel. They
Yeah.
totally did the ground floor and moved the desk to make room for this restaurant. And
So it's a beautiful place to have like a glass of champagne and a canapé, and they have a little garden room in the back, and it's very special.
And beautiful, one of the sets of glasses is sapphire blue. If you order sparkling water, you get it in the blue glass. If you order plain water, they take the blue glass away and again give you stemware. So I prefer flat water, but I drink sparkling water there because I like the glass so much. I like to use it.
So with that sparkling last commentary, I think we are going to turn it over to the audience for questions. And I think there is a mic. Or you can speak and I can translate your question.
Yeah, while we're waiting for the mic, I should add
Yes.
that a career in food really afforded me a fantastic life, much because of the travels and the strange places I've been to in search of food that I probably would not have gone to otherwise, and the marvelous friendships I made meeting people of similar interests. And so that, to me, has been one of the richest rewards of my career.
When you've written about travel a lot, I mean, we
A lot
talked
of
about food, but it seemed a little obvious. But
Food and place.
Yes, food and place. And I think right there.
Hi, Mimi. My husband and I, too, were very good friends with...
My husband and I were very good friends with
Frank Pellegrino.
Frank
We've been to
Pellegrino.
Rao's
Oh, really?
A million times.
Been to Rao's a million
You
times.
have to be a good friend if you've been millions of
I
times.
definitely agree with what you said.
Yeah, yeah.
But aside from that, have you been to the opening of the new 11 Madison Park yet?
No, I have not yet.
We had the pleasure of eating there in their outpost in the Hamptons over the summer.
Since it reopened?
They had
The
they
Hamptons.
opened
Oh.
in the Hamptons
Oh,
for
right.
11 weeks while they totally renovated.
I have to save up for that one. It's pretty expensive.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Right in the back? Oh, do you want to choose? Do you want to choose your people?
Hi. Why do you think some cuisines have fallen out of fashion in New York, such as Hungarian? You really can't get good Hungarian. And why were there so many more German restaurants, Luchau's, etc.?
Could you hear that?
Because there were more Germans.
Why,
there
why is
was,
it hard
you
to
know-
find Hungarian restaurants, and why were there more German restaurants?
Yeah, there was a sort of little Germany down around the Lower East Side, around Orchard Street. Eventually it moved up to 86th Street, which was Germantown for a long time. And also, I think some of the European immigrants from Eastern Europe and that part were probably attuned to that kind of food, and so went to the beer gardens, and they ate sauerkraut, and they drank beer. What was the first part of the question?
Cuisines seem to have faded. It's hard to find, for instance, good Hungarian food in the city.
Yeah, it seems that it's hard to find good Hungarian food.
Hungarian?
Yeah.
It used to be wonderful on, of course, the around 3rd Avenue in the 70s. We had many. I think that it probably developed the image of heaviness, which people were, not crazy about eating after a certain point. And again, the older immigrants who were the basis of those restaurants grew up, moved away, and wanted to eat other food. So it's a great loss. But we had, in that same neighborhood, we had Czech and Polish and Hungarian, which were wonderful and inexpensive, and great duck and goose on Sunday night. I remember that.
And there's still Schaller and Weber.
And then one did open in 1979, Vienna 79, which was a very elegant, stylized Austrian restaurant that I gave 4 stars to. It was really spectacular, but a little bit lighter, a little more measured presentations. And that man now has just opened a far more casual place called Grunauer Bistro, where Primavera used to be on 82nd Street and 1st Avenue. Peter Grunauer had Vienna 79 and now has this one.
I think right in the cap? Yeah.
Just a memory and then a question. My memory is that the New York Times, and I guess it's still true these days, can essentially, with a review, make or break the future of a restaurant. But I also remember that a mention of a particular grocery item in an article that I believe you wrote, it just created a demand that shot the price up by about 10 times. And I think it was when you wrote, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you wrote this or someone else did, when the price of monkfish.
Not me.
It was not you. Okay. Well, somebody in the Times wrote about monkfish.
Yeah.
It was the poor man's lobster, and the price went from 69
No,
cents
that
a
was not
pound.
me.
Okay, to $6.99 in a week.
I thought you were going to say Land O'Lakes butter, but but are you also asking me if a review can make or break a restaurant?
That was, you might answer that, but my other question, my real question was, where do you find the really good Bialys in New York anymore?
No place. I'll tell you where the best ones are. At Fred's at Barney's
No
for
way.
Sunday brunch. Mark Strausman has the bagels and Bialys baked every Saturday. They're sold retail by the dozen if your order is in before noon on Saturday morning, and you go and pick them up. But they are the best ones I have found now in New York.
And don't even ask Mimi about bagels.
Same there.
But you have
there's
such
the one
strong,
in
passionate
Brooklyn,
feelings about bagels.
Bagel Hole in Brooklyn is very, very good. Yeah.
Right there? Oh, another cap person.
Thank you. I was looking for that. The food the Germans brought from Manhattan, from Klein Deutschland, to Brooklyn, came along with the beer, and all of that went out to Coney Island with the most famous food from Coney Island, the hot dog. What would you consider the best hot dog?
Now, I still like Nathan's in Coney Island, not their hot dogs other, and the hot dogs at Katz's.
Okay. And one other question, Manhattan beach baths, could you talk about that, your days there?
Well, that's a long story, and you know it, John. But Manhattan Beach was a private beach club for many, many years where you took a locker for the season, and it was the happiest summers of my life, and all the big bands played there, and they played twice a day. Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, everything, and it had every kind of facility, and it was just a fabulous way to spend the summer. It closed right after Pearl Harbor Day because it became a Coast Guard base and then became public, and now is the site of the community college. So,
There was a question back in the corner.
and this lady too.
Outside of New York, what would you consider some of the other really exciting and interesting places
What
to
did
eat in
you
America?
say? After.
What other places in America are exciting to eat in outside of New York City?
New Orleans, very much New Orleans. I think LA and San Francisco, and I have always had very interesting food in Chicago. So, yes, this
The
lady.
woman, yeah.
If it's all right, I'd like to ask a personal question. How do you keep your figure?
Well, for a long time I didn't. When I left the New York Times, I weighed 210 pounds. I didn't keep my figure. But through the years, gradually, 10 or 20 pounds at a time, I got to what I am now. I lost 70 pounds. But it took a long, long time, and no special diet, just eating less, and very few carbs.
Didn't you said something, I've seen you quoted, I'm too smart to be this fat.
Yeah, that's what I was at a hairdresser one day, and they had, it was up at Elizabeth Arden, and they had big flowered smocks that you put on when your hair was going to be done. And I was sitting on a chair in front of a full-length mirror, and I looked in and I said, I look like a club chair in a summer slipcover. And then I thought, I'm too smart to be so fat. So that was my mantra.
I have to comment since you mentioned Brighton Beach, Mrs. Stahl's Knishes.
Was it what?
Mrs. Stahl's Knishes
Yes,
right across
I
the
loved
street.
them. I wrote a big piece.
Heavy, but I miss them dreadfully. And my question would be, if you had to pick one kind of food to eat, would you be able to pick one kind that you
You
could
mean
live with?
one good Chinese?
Interesting.
If I could
You were gonna say
if I
Italian.
could get the whole spread of it well done, and that's the trick. I think there's a gentleman back there.
Yeah, speaking of fat, you mentioned duck briefly. After the Four Seasons closed, where would you go for duck now?
For duck, I had a fantastic duck last night at the Beatrice Inn. Incredible duck, flambéed at the table. There's, of course, Chinese restaurants with Peking duck, which I think is the single best duck preparation in the world, and whoever invented it should have statues in the park. I don't know how you devise a dish like that. There's very good duck à l'orange at the grill. There are a lot of places that make good duck.
Do you like the nomad
In
duck?
New York.
The nomad duck?
I don't remember it.
That's,
Oh, no, I remember their chicken. That comes in
Yeah.
2 episodes, but no. But Chinese cook duck and squab better. Squab is my favorite poultry.
When you're not going out, what do you cook at home?
When you're
I'm-
not going out, what do you cook at home?
Well, I don't cook much now. My husband died 3.5 years ago, and I'm not very interested in dirtying a lot of pots and pans for myself. So I usually make maybe pan broil a piece of steak or a hamburger, or I will cook chicken in one or another ways, or I will have an omelet. It depends on whether I went out for lunch to some great lunch. I also cannot stand eating at the dining table alone, so I eat in an armchair watching Jeopardy, and therefore the food I devise has to be able to be eaten in an armchair. So a fried egg is very difficult because of the yolk, but scrambled eggs are okay. I'm thinking of writing an armchair gourmet cookbook where everything is cut out.
But you're a great Scandinavian cook. Did I make that up?
Yeah, I did a lot of that. My husband and I always had a New Year's Day open house smorgasbord, and I cooked the food for 75 people, made the gravlax, did all Scandinavian, because as a result of my first career in writing about furniture and design, that was in the 50s at the height of Scandinavian design, and I went several times a year to all of the trade and craft fairs in Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway. I have a house full of Danish furniture, and always pursuing the food on my own, and I love the food in Scandinavia, particularly Denmark. So I did quite a lot of that.
And we have time for one more question. Who's the lucky questioner? There. I'm so sorry. I probably was ignoring that side of the room.
Actually, could you answer that question from earlier about if a food critic can make or break a restaurant, and the pressure that puts on the critic and the pressure that puts on the chef and the restaurant?
Can you translate?
Yeah. So she was wondering what the answer to the question about whether a critic can make or break a restaurant, and what is that the effect on the critic? Like, does that make you feel terrible? And the effect on the chef, how does that make them feel about the critic?
It makes, if it's a good review, the chef feels wonderful. If it's a bad review, he feels terrible and think you were unfair and you didn't know what you were talking about. I don't believe in the long run you can make or break a restaurant. You can create a very bad effect for a long time, but more restaurants have closed that got high ratings from me than got low. So you can't really make or break. I was very careful. If I knew a restaurant was having trouble and was sort of teetering and it wasn't good, I didn't review it. But you can't always know that in advance. If you give it a great review, its success will depend on how it handles the review. If it goes to their head and they feel, well, you know, we're so great, then maybe it isn't going to work. But if they keep up the quality, then it can make them. You know.
And that, I think, is what we have time for. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you all.